We were just trying to make good time. The drive had been long, and the kids were tired, so was I, honestly. My husband, Eric, was at the wheel while I fiddled with my phone, half-heartedly searching for a place to stay. It was already late, close to midnight, and the only lights on the stretch of road were from our car and the occasional flickering neon sign of some roadside diner. The weather didn't help. Rain started drizzling, then quickly turned into a downpour that made the windshield wipers work overtime. And then we saw it, a modest sign for Sunset Motel, its letters glowing faintly against the dark sky. "It'll do," I mumbled, and Eric pulled into the gravel lot. The building looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since the 70s, but it wasn't terrible. We were too exhausted to care about anything beyond a bed and a roof. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up from his phone as he handed us the keys. "Room 107. Sleep tight," he said with a wry grin, his gaze lingering a moment too long as if he knew a secret I didn't. The fluorescent light above him flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across his face. A shiver ran down my spine, but I told myself it was just the cold rain clinging to my clothes. We trudged to the room, lugging our bags and the kids' stuff, and settled in quickly. Eric and the kids fell asleep almost instantly, their soft breathing filling the small room. I stayed up a little longer, putting away some essentials and checking my phone. Finally, I slid under the covers, but sleep wouldn't come. It started subtly. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just the wind or the creak of the old building. But then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of the door handle twitching. My pulse quickened. I held my breath, listening, hoping it was just my tired mind playing tricks. But there it was again, a slow, deliberate jiggle, like someone testing the lock. "Eric," I whispered, nudging him. "Eric, wake up." He groaned but didn't move. "There's someone at the door," I hissed, my voice barely audible. That got his attention. He sat up, blinking away sleep, and stared at me. Then we both froze as the handle twitched again. Eric got up quietly and approached the door. He peeked through the peephole but saw nothing. "Probably just a prank," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He opened the door a crack and looked out. The rain was still falling, and the parking lot was empty except for our car. No one was there. Eric locked the door again and climbed back into bed, muttering something about teenagers and lousy motels. But I couldn't relax. Minutes stretched into hours, or so it felt, and I stayed awake, listening. Just when I started to think I was overreacting, it happened again. The handle twitched, this time more insistently. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering. "Eric, it's happening again." He didn't bother with the peephole this time. He flung the door open, ready to confront whoever was messing with us. But again, there was no one. Just the rain and the faint hum of the motel's flickering sign. Eric cursed under his breath and locked the door again, pushing a chair under the handle for good measure. By now, the kids were stirring, but they didn't fully wake. I wished I could go back to sleep like they had. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, every creak of the building setting me on edge. Felt like hours before the handle twitched again. This time, it wasn't subtle. It rattled, hard and purposeful, as if someone was trying to force the door open. "Stay here," Eric said, his voice low and tense. He grabbed the heaviest thing he could find, a table lamp, and opened the door, his muscles coiled like he was ready for a fight. There was no one, but this time something was there. A photo lay on the floor, face up, water droplets from Eric's damp footprints streaking its glossy surface. My breath hitched as I stepped closer, each movement heavy with dread. Eric picked it up, his hand trembling slightly, and turned it toward me. The air seemed to grow colder as my eyes fell on the image. It was us, our family, smiling, from earlier that day. But something felt wrong, the kind of wrong that settles deep in your gut before you even process why. It was a picture of us, our family, from earlier that day. The kids were smiling. Eric had his arm around me, and we were standing by our car. But there was something else. A man's face was circled in red, and scrawled in messy handwriting were the words, "I know your every move." I turned the photo over, my hands shaking. On the back was our home address. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Eric grabbed our bags, and I woke the kids as gently as I could. "We're leaving," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. The kids, confused and groggy, followed us without protest. We piled into the car, and Eric didn't even wait for me to buckle up before peeling out of the parking lot. The rain was relentless, and the road ahead was a blur of darkness and water. My mind raced with questions. Who was that man? How did he get that photo? How did he know our address? And, most chilling of all, why was he hunting us? We drove for hours, not stopping until we found a well-lit gas station with security cameras. Only then did we breathe. Eric called the police, though there wasn't much they could do. The motel staff claimed not to know anything, and the cameras there conveniently didn't work. We've since changed our address, installed cameras, and tried to move on, but the memory lingers. Even now, I wonder if he's still watching, waiting for the right moment to remind us he knows our every move. If you're here for the first time, make sure to subscribe to our channel and tap the bell icon so you never miss a terrifying story. Your support means so much to us. Be sure to share these eerie tales with your friends and family. Thank you for being part of our community. Now, let's jump into the next story. I've always loved road trips. There's something freeing about cruising down the highway with no fixed schedule, no one to answer to, and only the hum of the engine for company. But that night, my love for the open road nearly got me killed. I'd been driving for hours, the rain pouring in thick sheets, hammering against my windshield. The weather wasn't just bad. It was apocalyptic. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the darkened road ahead, and my wipers struggled to keep up. I knew I couldn't go much farther. When I spotted the flickering neon sign of a motel in the distance, it felt like salvation. "Vacancy," the sign buzzed, casting an eerie pink glow over the parking lot. The building itself was unremarkable. A long row of rooms with peeling paint and dim porch lights. I pulled in, turned off the engine, and made a mad dash through the rain to the front office. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and mildew. A man sat behind the counter, his face partially obscured by the shadow of a dangling bulb. He was thin, with a greasy comb-over and hollow eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Room for the night?" I asked, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. He nodded, slid a key across the counter, and muttered, "Room 12, end of the hall." The exchange was quick, almost mechanical, and before I could ask any questions, he turned his attention to an old TV buzzing static in the corner. Shrugging, I grabbed the key and headed to my room. The hallway was dimly lit, with walls painted a sickly yellow that looked worse under the fluorescent lights. A musty carpet muffled my footsteps as I passed closed doors, each one identical to the last. I reached room 12, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a cheap roadside motel. A lumpy bed, a battered dresser with a small, outdated TV, and curtains that barely covered the window. The smell of mildew was stronger here, mixed with something faintly metallic. I shivered, blaming the cold rainwater soaking my clothes. After locking the door and bolting it for good measure, I changed into dry clothes and collapsed onto the bed. The storm outside roared on, wind howling like a living thing. I'd planned to watch TV, but the static-filled screen only deepened the unease gnawing at me. Exhaustion won out, and I eventually drifted off. I woke suddenly, heart pounding, though I couldn't immediately tell why. The room was silent, except for the muffled patter of rain against the window. Then I heard it, a soft rustling, like fabric brushing against fabric. My eyes darted to the corner of the room, where the shadowed outline of the chair sat empty. I could have sworn it had been closer to the window when I fell asleep. Trying to calm myself, I told myself it was just paranoia. I checked the locks on the door and the window, both secure. Still uneasy, I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket up to my chin. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the floorboards and groan of the wind set my nerves on edge. The next morning, I woke to find my suitcase open. The contents had been disturbed. Clothes folded in ways I'd never fold them. My phone, which I'd left charging on the nightstand, was now placed neatly on top of the dresser. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it. Had I done it in my sleep? No, that didn't make sense. Someone had been in my room. I confronted the man at the front desk. He barely glanced up from his newspaper as I explained what happened. "No one's got keys but me," he said dismissively, his tone flat. "Maybe you're just tired." His indifference infuriated me, but I didn't press further. Instead, I decided to leave the motel after one more night. It wasn't worth the hassle to drive through the storm again. I told myself I'd sleep with my keys in my pocket and my suitcase shoved in front of the door. That night, I barely slept. I stayed fully dressed, my shoes on, ready to bolt if something happened. Around 2 a.m., the sound of the doorknob rattling jolted me upright. My breath caught in my throat as I listened. A metallic scraping noise followed, like someone was fiddling with the lock. My heart pounded as adrenaline surged through me. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the peephole. Outside, I saw a figure standing in the hallway, their face obscured by the poor lighting. They weren't moving, just standing there, waiting. Then, a second figure joined them, this one taller, their head almost brushing the ceiling. My blood ran cold. They whispered to each other, their voices low and urgent. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was sinister. One of them reached into their pocket and pulled out a small, shiny object. A key. I didn't wait to see what happened next. Grabbing my bag, I slipped out the window, my heart hammering in my chest. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and the muddy ground sucked at my shoes as I crept toward my car. I didn't dare look back. I could feel eyes on me, though, a prickling sensation that refused to let up. When I reached the car, I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The two figures stood in the motel doorway watching me leave. Even from a distance, I could see the glint of their eyes in the dim light. They didn't move, didn't chase me. They just watched. I drove until dawn, not stopping until I was miles away from that cursed motel. To this day, I don't know what they wanted or what they planned to do. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear the faint sound of a doorknob rattling, and I'll remember the way their eyes glinted in the dark. It was December 13th, 2022, and I was driving through the icy backroads of upstate New York. A snowstorm had rolled in faster than the weatherman predicted, and I was caught in the middle of it. The swirling snow made the highway ahead nearly invisible, and I could barely make out the signs. I was desperate to find somewhere to stop for the night, somewhere warm, safe. Just as I was about to give up, my headlights caught a faded blue sign. The Maple Hollow Motel, vacancy. I turned into the snow-covered driveway, my tires crunching over the ice. The building looked like something out of a forgotten postcard from the 70s. The peeling paint, flickering neon sign, and darkened windows all screamed, "Stay away." But I didn't have a choice. The wind howled as I stepped out of my car, tugging my scarf tighter around my neck. The air was so cold it stung my lungs. The office was empty when I entered, except for a small bell on the counter. I rang it, and after a moment, an elderly woman shuffled out from a back room. Her face was a maze of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Need a room?" she asked, her voice raspy but oddly melodic. "Yeah, just for the night," I said, my voice shaky from the cold. She handed me a key attached to a bulky wooden tag. "Room 7, far end." Don't go wandering. Storm's worse than it looks. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, though I chalked it up to her no-nonsense demeanor. I nodded, thanked her, and made my way to the room. Room 7 was at the very end of the row, tucked under a broken lamp that cast eerie shadows on the snow. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a space that was surprisingly clean but undeniably old. The wallpaper was faded, curling at the edges, and the bedspread was a garish floral print that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. A radiator clanked in the corner, struggling to keep the chill at bay. As I locked the door behind me, I noticed another door on the far wall. It wasn't an exit but an interior door, thick and solid, with a brass handle. I tried the knob, but it didn't budge. There was no keyhole, just a metal latch on my side. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, the hinges rusted and discolored. I shrugged it off, unpacked a few things, and tried to settle in. The snowstorm outside seemed to intensify, the wind battering the windows like an impatient visitor. I turned on the TV, hoping for some distraction, but it only played static. With nothing else to do, I crawled under the scratchy blanket and closed my eyes. At first, it was just the wind, a low, mournful sound that rattled the windows. But then, just as I was drifting off, I heard something else. A soft scratching, faint and deliberate, coming from the other side of the locked door. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the door. The sound stopped. I told myself it was probably just the storm or maybe an old pipe shifting in the walls. I lay back down, forcing myself to breathe deeply. The scratching started again, louder this time. My chest tightened, and I stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open. Then came the whispering, a faint, unintelligible murmur, like someone speaking just out of earshot. It rose and fell, the words too garbled to understand but unmistakably there. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was scared. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, but there was no service, no signal. Of course, there wasn't. This place was too remote, too isolated. I checked the time, 2:13 a.m. The storm outside raged on, making escape impossible. The whispers grew louder, angrier. They seemed to come from deep within the door, vibrating through the walls. I pressed my ear to the wood, hoping to make sense of them, but all I got was a deep, guttural growl that made my blood run cold. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my bag. Then the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The sound reverberated through the room, making my teeth chatter. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was behind that door. With shaking hands, I slid the latch open. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a pitch-black room. The smell hit me first, a sickly sweet odor mixed with mildew and something metallic. I shone my phone's flashlight into the space. It was a small storage room, the walls lined with shelves of old linens and cleaning supplies. But in the center of the room was a single chair, and sitting in the chair was a figure. At first, I thought it was a mannequin. It was so still, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. But then its chest moved, a slow, deliberate rise and fall. My flashlight flickered, and when it steadied, the figure was standing. Its eyes locked onto mine, wide and unblinking, its mouth curling into a grotesque grin. The skin was grayish, taut over sharp cheekbones, and its hands were too long, the fingers ending in jagged, blackened nails. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Took a step forward, then another, its movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. The whispers turned into screams, a cacophony of voices echoing in my head. Somehow, I found the strength to slam the door shut. I locked the latch, pushed the bed against it, and grabbed my bag. I didn't care about the storm anymore. I wasn't staying another second. The snow was knee-deep as I ran to my car, the wind cutting through my coat. I started the engine and didn't look back. My hands shook on the wheel as I drove, the motel disappearing into the swirling snow behind me. To this day, I don't know what I saw in that room. I don't know if it was real or some sleep-deprived hallucination. But every time I close my eyes, I see that grin, those eyes, and I hear the whispers calling me back. I'll never drive that road again.